The turkey is too big for one plate. It always is. Every year you tell yourself you'll cook smaller. And every year your hands do what they've always done. Season, baste, roast, because some habits outlive the reason you started them. You set the table for 6 anyway. 6 plates, 6 forks, 6 folded napkins. The good china your mother left you 40 years ago. Then you sit down, alone, in a dining room built for a family that stopped coming. And you eat Thanksgiving dinner across from 5 empty chairs. Your name is Verlene Ashby. You are 79 years old. And this is the 6th Thanksgiving in a row you've spent exactly like this, if you've ever sat at a table meant for more people than showed up. If you know what it feels like to keep setting a place for people who stopped, RSVPing to your life, stay with me, because this story is for you. And if it moves you even a little, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe, because there are more stories like Verlene's, about the quiet dignity of people the world stopped checking in on, and they deserve an audience that still cares. Because loneliness doesn't announce itself with a scream. It arrives one empty chair at a time. You weren't always the woman eating alone in a house too quiet for its own size. You were once the center of a loud and overflowing household. Roscoe's laugh booming from the kitchen doorway. Your son Thatcher underfoot with a football helmet 3 sizes too big. The smell of sage and butter thick enough to taste in the hallway. You and Roscoe built that house together in 1974, back when a schoolteacher's salary and a mechanic's wages could still buy 4 bedrooms and a yard big enough for a swing set. You raised Thatcher there. You buried 2 dogs in the back corner under the maple tree. You hosted 31 consecutive Thanksgivings in that dining room. Before the 32nd, one arrived and something in the pattern broke. Roscoe passed 6 years ago. A heart attack in the garage, wrench still in his hand. Gone before the ambulance turned onto your street. You remember the silence after. Not just the silence of the house, but the silence that spread outward, into your son's phone calls, into the holidays, into the shape of your whole life. Thatcher was 38 then, married to a woman named Isolde who ran a boutique, interior design firm 2 towns over, and had very particular opinions about how holidays should be spent, specifically at her parents' lake house with her parents' china, following her parents' traditions. The first Thanksgiving after Roscoe died, Thatcher called to say they'd decided to do the holiday at the lake house that year, just to switch things up. And you said, of course, "Sweetheart, that sounds lovely," because you didn't want to be the widow who made her grief everyone else's obligation. The second Thanksgiving, the lake house had become tradition. The third, Thatcher mentioned maybe you could join them sometime. Once things settle, though things never quite settled enough. By the 4th Thanksgiving, you'd stopped waiting for an invitation and started expecting the absence instead, which somehow hurt less and more at the same time. Your granddaughter Marlo was 9 when Roscoe died. She's 15 now. You've watched her grow up almost entirely through photographs. Isolde posts online, recital costumes, honor roll certificates, a driver's permit picture, with a smile that used to run straight to you across this very yard when she was small enough to be lifted. You keep every photo in an album, you update yourself because nobody else thinks to. The tension crept in slowly, the way it always does when people don't hate each other. They just quietly stop choosing each other. It wasn't cruelty. That's the part that made it hardest to name. Nobody was ever unkind to you outright. Thatcher still called on your birthday. Isolde still sent a poinsettia at Christmas, ordered online, delivered by a stranger in a green apron, who never quite met your eyes when you signed for it. You told yourself it was just the way modern families worked now, spread out, busy, everyone managing their own small orbit. You told yourself Roscoe would have understood, would have said, "Let them live their lives, V." We had ours. But some nights, especially around the holidays, you'd catch yourself standing in the doorway of Thatcher's old bedroom, now a guest room nobody used, running your hand along the doorframe where you used to mark his height every birthday, and the ache would arrive uninvited and sit with you until morning. You called Thatcher once, 2 years ago, and asked him plainly, the way you'd never quite had the courage to before, "Do you still think about coming for Thanksgiving, even just for pie after the lake house?" He was quiet for a moment, and you could hear Isolde's voice faintly in the background. And then he said, "Mom, it's a lot of driving for just pie. Maybe next year, when things aren't so crazy." Things were always crazy. You'd stopped believing they'd ever be uncrazy enough to include you. The neighborhood around you had changed too. Over the years, young families moving in, Older neighbors moving to assisted living or passing on. Faces at the mailbox you no longer recognized. You kept to your routine. Church on Sunday. Grocery on Tuesday. The garden in summer, though your knees complained more each year about the kneeling. You told yourself you were fine. You told yourself a lot of things you didn't quite believe. The breaking point arrived on the 6th Thanksgiving, though it didn't announce itself as a breaking point at the time. It just felt like one holiday indistinguishable from the last 5. You'd cooked the full dinner out of a stubbornness you couldn't fully explain, even to yourself. The turkey, the stuffing with sage from your own garden. The cranberry sauce made from scratch because Roscoe always said the canned kind was a crime against the holiday. You set 6 places. You always set 6, though you couldn't have said exactly who the 6th was for anymore. Maybe just for the ghost of what the table used to hold. You called Thatcher that morning. It rang 3 times before he picked up. And behind him you could hear the lake house sounds. Laughter, the clink of glasses, someone's dog barking at something. "Mom, happy Thanksgiving!" We're just about to sit down. "Everything good over there?" "Everything's good," you said. And it wasn't a lie exactly, just an incomplete truth. The kind you'd gotten skilled at telling. "I made the turkey. Sage stuffing, like always." "That's great, Mom. Hey, listen. I should go help Isolde with the table. But I'll call you this weekend, okay? Love you." The call ended before you'd finished saying it back. You sat down at your own table at 2 p.m., the way you always had, and you ate a Thanksgiving dinner built for 6 across from 5 chairs that hadn't held a body in 6 years. The turkey was perfect. Roscoe would have said so. Nobody said so, because nobody was there to say anything at all. It was somewhere around the pumpkin pie, cut into 8 slices out of habit, 7 of which would go untouched, that something in you simply gave out. Quietly, the way a rope frays for years before it finally lets go. You didn't cry loudly. You weren't the type. You just sat there with a fork in your hand and let the tears come the way rain comes to a drought, overdue, and somehow still a surprise. You thought, in that moment, about how easy it would be to simply stop cooking the big dinner next year, to stop setting 6 plates, to let the tradition die quietly, the way so much else already had. And underneath that thought was a darker one you didn't let yourself finish, about how much space a person could take up in the world before the world simply forgot to make room for her at all. The knock came at 4:30 that same afternoon, while you were still sitting at the table, pie mostly untouched, house gone dim with the early dark of late November. You almost didn't answer. You weren't dressed for company, and you couldn't imagine who'd be calling on a holiday when the whole street seemed to have gone quiet behind closed curtains and family gatherings. But the knock came again, a little uncertain, and something about its hesitance made you get up anyway. Standing on your porch was a young man you didn't recognize, maybe 35, holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7, both of them looking like they'd had a day that hadn't gone according to plan. He had the kind of tired, apologetic face of someone used to things going sideways and trying to stay steady anyway. "I'm so sorry to bother you," he said. "We just moved in 3 doors down, the blue house, and, well, this is going to sound ridiculous, but our oven broke this morning, completely dead, and I promised Clementine here a real Thanksgiving. And I don't know a single person in this town yet. And I saw your porch light on, and I thought—" He stopped, looking embarrassed. "I'm Journey Pemberton. This is my daughter, Clementine. We don't need anything, I didn't know who else to ask." You looked at the little girl, Clementine, who was watching you with the particular careful hope of a child who'd already learned that holidays could go wrong. And you thought about your own dining room, 6 plates set, 5 empty chairs, an entire turkey that would otherwise go into the refrigerator to be eaten alone for the next 4 days. "Well," you said, and your voice came out steadier than you expected, "it just so happens I made entirely too much food for one person. Come in out of the cold." You didn't know it yet, standing in that doorway. But that knock would turn out to be the turning point of your entire year, maybe your entire 6 years since Roscoe passed. Journey and Clementine sat down at your table, at 2 of the 5 empty chairs, and for the first time in half a decade, the dining room held the sound of more than one voice. Journey, it turned out, was a single father. His wife had left when Clementine was 3, walked out with little explanation and less contact since, and he'd been raising his daughter alone while working as a contractor, taking whatever jobs came his way, moving to this town because a project had brought steady work for the first time in 2 years. He talked about it plainly, without self-pity, the way people do when they've made peace with a hard thing by simply deciding not to dwell on it. Clementine, for her part, ate 2 helpings of stuffing and asked if she could see your garden, and you found yourself walking her through the frost-touched rows by flashlight, telling her about the sage that Roscoe used to say made the best stuffing in 3 counties. And for the first time in longer than you wanted to admit, you weren't performing gratitude for a holiday you didn't feel. You were simply quietly happy. They stayed until nearly 8. When they left, Journey stood on the porch a moment longer than necessary and said, "I don't know how to thank you for this. Clementine hasn't laughed like that in months. You can thank me," you said, "by knocking again sometime. Doesn't have to be a holiday." He did. That was the thing nobody expected, least of all you. He started stopping by on weekends, sometimes just to fix the porch step that had been loose since Roscoe passed, sometimes to bring Clementine over so she could help in the garden, which mostly meant digging holes in places you hadn't asked her to dig. You started teaching her to bake, the way you once taught Thatcher, patient corrections about not overworking the dough, the particular joy of watching a child's face when something she made with her own hands came out of the oven. Somewhere in those months, without either of you quite naming it, you became something like family to each other, not replacing what you'd lost, but filling a space that had sat empty long enough that you'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be needed. Word got back to Thatcher eventually, the way these things do in small towns, a mutual acquaintance mentioning, in passing, that your mother's got a young family looking after her now. Seem real close, her and that little girl especially. Thatcher called you that spring, his voice carrying an odd note you couldn't quite place. "Mom, who's this Journey guy people are talking about?" You told him plainly, the neighbor, the broken oven, the knock on Thanksgiving, the friendship that had grown since. You didn't dress it up and you didn't apologize for it, though you noticed, even as you spoke, a small defensive edge in your own voice, like you were bracing for judgment. Thatcher was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised you both. "I didn't even call you on Thanksgiving this year. Did I? I mean, I did, but I—" He stopped. "Mom, were you alone before this guy showed up?" "I've been alone every Thanksgiving for 6 years, Thatcher," you said. And you said it without malice, just as fact. The way you'd say the sky was gray. "I set 6 plates every year. I don't rightly know why. Habit, I suppose." The silence on the line that followed was longer and heavier than any silence you'd shared with your son in years. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. "I didn't know it was that bad. I thought, I don't know what I thought, that you were fine, that you'd tell us if you weren't. I didn't want to be a burden," you said. "You have your own life, Isolde's family. I understood. You're not a burden, Mom." His voice cracked slightly on the word. "God, I've been so... I let the lake house become an excuse to not think about it." "That's on me. That's not on you." Thatcher showed up on your porch 2 weeks later. Unannounced, Marlowe in tow, 15 now, taller than you remembered, hugging you with the slightly awkward energy of a teenager who hadn't hugged her grandmother in longer than she'd realized. Isolde came too, hanging back at first, but by the end of the afternoon, she was in your kitchen asking about your sage stuffing recipe, and something in her face when she asked told you she meant it as more than politeness. They stayed for dinner that night, not Thanksgiving, just a regular Tuesday, but it felt like the holiday you'd been missing for 6 years. Journey and Clementine came too at your invitation, and you watched your son shake Journey's hand with genuine warmth. Watched Marlowe and Clementine end up in the garden together, within 20 minutes like they'd known each other for years. "I want you to know," Thatcher said quietly, helping you clear the table later, while the others sat outside in the last of the evening light, "that this Thanksgiving we're coming here. All of us, and I mean every year after that too. I should have made that promise a long time ago." You didn't need the promise to know something had already changed. You could feel it in the house itself, the particular warmth of rooms that had been empty, too long finally filling back up, not because anyone owed you their presence, but because they'd chosen it. This Thanksgiving, the 7th since Roscoe passed, though it hardly feels like a continuation of those lonely 6. Your dining room table seats 8 instead of 6, with 2 folding chairs brought in from the garage because you'd run out of room. Thatcher carves the turkey the way Roscoe used to, a task he asked to take on this year. And you notice his hands shake slightly the first time he lifts the knife, the weight of the tradition landing on him in a way it hadn't before. Isolde brings a pie recipe from her own mother, offered almost shyly, like a peace offering you didn't know you needed. Marlowe sets the table without being asked, carefully folding each napkin the way you taught her when she was small enough to need a stool to reach the counter. And Journey and Clementine sit where they've sat every week since that first knock. Not guests anymore, but something closer to family. The kind you don't share blood with, but chose and were chosen by, in a moment when it mattered most. Before the meal, you find yourself standing at the head of the table, looking at 8 place settings instead of 5 empty chairs, and you think about how close you came to letting that 6th Thanksgiving be the year you simply stopped trying. How one knock, from a stranger who needed help just as much as you did, without either of you knowing it, became the thread that pulled your whole family back together. You don't say a long speech. You've never been one for those. You just raise your glass, look around the table at every face that chose to be there, and say the only thing that feels true enough to say out loud. The house was never empty. We just forgot to knock.